Today, the first official words from the Taliban since they swept to power.
Our God, our Quran says that woman is a very important part of our society. They can work, they can get education, they are needed in our society, and they will be actively involved.
But there's a big caveat. They say within the framework of Sharia law. So just how ominous is that for women? We'll be speaking to Afghans on the ground, and we hear from one of the country's most senior businesswomen and a political activist for women's rights who fled Kabul yesterday on a British military flight and arrived here early this morning. The Taliban say no one's at risk. Tonight, the UK government lays out its plan for Afghan refugees. Also tonight, the government plans which could end Gypsy, Roma and traveller traditions, including Appleby Fair. Their leader calls it a form of ethnic cleansing.
I think it's a populist policy by a populist government who's looking at a very tiny minority who are basically defenceless against them.
Good evening. There was a strange disconnect in Afghanistan today. An unprecedented press conference by a Taliban promising peace and inclusivity and amnesty for all who've worked for foreign powers. And the reality of what we know about the Taliban's murder of women in public roles, including judges and journalists, the stonings and reports of rape. Such is the fear of their return to power that thousands of people are desperate to leave the country. Meanwhile, the Taliban's political leadership has returned from their headquarters in Qatar. So how should the international community deal with the Taliban now? We'll be exploring that during the programme. But first, I'm joined by our international editor, Gabriel Gatehouse. Gabriel, what about the latest developments?
Well, Kirsty, as you said, the political leadership in the form of Mullah Baradar has arrived in Kandahar. He's head of the political office and one of the movement's co-founders. But really the main event of the day was this extraordinary press conference in Kabul where a Taliban spokesman was being quizzed by journalists, foreign and Afghan, and really trying to strike a very reassuring tone. They were saying that Taliban fighters were in Kabul to guarantee everyone's security. They said they would protect foreign embassies, NGOs, media organisations. He also said that he recognised there were anxieties in the international community about Afghanistan again becoming a haven for foreign fighters. And here's what he said about that.
It is very understandable the international community is expressing worries about the security and about Afghanistan. But I reassure all internationals, the UN, all embassies, to all our neighbors, that we will not be allowing the soil of Afghanistan to be used against anybody.
Well, you spoke about caveats in your introduction. There was a caveat to this. In return, the Taliban said they expected the international community to engage with them.
And the key area of women's rights, the key area that they actually did address today.
Right, and lots of very pointed questions about this from Afghan journalists, some of them women.
Which is extraordinary in itself.
In itself. And again, a real attempt to sound reassuring, but again with the caveat of Sharia law, which we don't really know what that means.
Our plans for women, they are allowed to work, they are allowed to educate according to Sharia. They are a very important part of our society. We need them. They need to be actively involved in our society, but according to Sharia.
You've been speaking to people on the ground. What are they making of it?
Well, you said the word disconnect, Kirsty. I think that's exactly right. There's this weird atmosphere on the streets of Kabul. I mean, we saw pictures of women protesting their rights, undaunted by the arrival of the Taliban, but watched over by Taliban fighters passing there in the trucks that they'd taken off Afghan security forces. I think it's clear that despite the emollient tone, that the Taliban see this as a resounding victory and they feel they've won the right to rule Afghanistan as they see fit. And so many people that you tried to speak to are in hiding. Before we came on air, I spoke to one woman. She runs a series of schools for girls. She is in hiding, but she was in a defiant mood. And I asked her what she made of that press conference.
very good to hear it. It sounds nice to the ears that the women won't be stopped from working, women won't be stopped from education, blah, blah, blah. But then let's put it in practice and then we'll trust you and then we will move forward. So right now, two different narratives. They are not letting girls go to university in Herat. They are not letting women work in bank in Kandahar, but then they claim to be like, all for women rights and educational rights and all that. But it's important to understand that Afghan women are not willing to give up. And they are trying to fight back and they are willing to fight back. So even if it's from any location, we're here, we're in Afghanistan and we are fighting for our rights.
Right, and you intend to keep running your schools no matter what the Taliban says?
Yeah, one way or the other, I get my way. I mean, like, enough with them, enough with their way.
Incredibly defiant.
Incredible.
And of course, we've seen all these scenes much more explosive yesterday, people desperately trying to get on flights. But what about people trying to get out today?
Well, the Taliban today talked about an amnesty for people like translators and stuff, but many people simply aren't buying it. Over the past 24 hours, I've had increasingly panicked calls from people, including from one very prominent women's rights activist. We understand she's actually on the Foreign Office list to get on a plane out, but she doesn't know how to physically get to the airport past those Taliban checkpoints. Now, the official Foreign Office advice to these people is shelter in place until you get called for your flight. But she says the Taliban are going door to door looking specifically for her, and she fears that if they find her, they will kill her. Now, we've repeatedly asked the FCO, the MOD, and the Home Office how people like her are supposed to coordinate these really dangerous journeys from where they're in hiding in Kabul to the airport to evacuate, and no one can tell us.
Yet another disconnect. Gabriel, thank you very much indeed. Well, so far the British military operation has managed to get roughly 750 people out of Kabul airport, but there are many more who either worked for the coalition directly or indirectly, and Afghan politicians and activists who are still clamouring to leave but are so far stranded. The government's decision tonight to take 5,000 refugees from Afghanistan this year will be cold comfort for many desperate to leave quickly. Now, Hasina Saeed is one of the country's most senior businesswomen. She runs a number of major companies in Afghanistan, is a former Businesswoman of the Year in the country, and founded an NGO, the Afghan National Organisation for Women, and was an advocate for strengthening women's role in the peace process. Well, she was one of the thousands pressing into the airport desperate to get out. Hasina Saeed managed to get onto a British military flight yesterday and joins us now from a Birmingham hotel where she is self-isolating. Good evening and thank you so very much for joining us. I wonder, did you think you were going to get out?
Good evening. No, I was not sure at all. And I was really, like other people, I was really in a panic.
What was it like trying to escape?
It's like a end of your life, and you don't know what's going on because everything happens so sudden that you even lose your mind to not to know what to do first.
So you weren't even on the list. You weren't even on a list. But your husband and children are in the UK. And what ID did you have? What did you do?
I think with the help of some of my friends, international friends, I really thank them, and also has much more people they know about my background, who am I, so that helped a lot.
But you had an Afghan passport, but what else did you have?
I had my British driving license and Afghan passport.
And so what was the response of the soldiers when you managed to fight your way into the airport?
Oh, fantastic. I think it makes me always cry because I never expected that much good behavior, good gesture. They have helped me a lot. Not even me. I was looking, the whole camp was full of Afghan people who tried to get out, and they helped. I really salute those heroes who has really supported us morally, physically. I really support those heroes and the soldiers who has helped us.
What do you think would have happened to you had you not been able to get out?
Has the other activists, the woman activists is saying the same thing. They are coming door to door and they could find me and they could take me, and you never know what will happen to me because it's everything what they say depends on the time. Let's see what their attitudes will be for women in Afghanistan.
Now, you managed to take some iPhone footage and pictures when you were on the plane, but can you describe your feelings as the plane took off?
It was like a bit of relief because personally, but when you see all these people, you feel a bit relaxed, but still you think about those people who has left behind, and you really want them to do something for them to get out from Afghanistan. And I also, again, I admire the British soldiers who has helped even during when we were in the aircraft. They were handing over all the bottled waters, food and everything, helping the kids, even when the kids were crying, the children were crying, they were helping a lot. It was like really hard, touching hard. Really.
And what was the atmosphere like on the plane? You were talking about children crying, but what was the atmosphere like among people? Were they quiet or were they elated?
I think everybody got very emotional, and most of us, we began to cry a lot. That right now I'm getting that feelings.
So the Taliban, as you saw, because I know you saw the press conference today, are trying to present themselves as peaceful and inclusive. But what should women in Afghanistan make of that, do you think?
I think it's all depend. Right now the time is so thin. We can't really predict what will happen, what's going to be happen. So let's see and watch. That's why I fled quickly, because the situation was very unpredictable, and people doesn't know. Even none of Afghan people nor foreigners, they don't know what's going to be happen in the next 2 days. So let's see in the first few weeks that how much they will be standing in their promises. Then we will see it.
It's interesting because you wanted women to be more active in the peace process. So you obviously you were alert to the Taliban, you were watching how they were working and so forth. In your view, are there different kinds of Taliban?
I think you can see the Taliban has a big change because of press conference, you see, and it's before when in the old days when they were not letting any journalist to interview them because of their faces not to be seen in the camera or something, or they were not letting at all the women to be film them or to interview them. You can see a bit changes that makes us a little bit hopeful, but let's see, the time will tell.
And you've spoken to women who are, in a way, left behind or in Afghanistan today. And what are they telling you? What are they worried about?
They are worrying. We have right now the same worry and the same issue, the same topic, that they just want to get out because they think that the Taliban will come and they will capture them because of unknown reason, or because they have been working with USAID or to any other embassies, or teaching the teachers or something. So they have the same feeling that they will come and take them away from home.
And finally, you know, as a senior businesswoman and as a woman who has been fighting for women's rights in Afghanistan, would you go back to Afghanistan on the say-so, on the word of the Taliban that you would be safe? Would you be prepared to go back?
Once the situation calmed down, yes, definitely. Afghanistan is my country, and we are working very hard with the help of international community to build this country. No matter what happened, we have to build again and again.
Hasina Saeed, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well, ahead of the recall of Parliament tomorrow, the government has just announced the outline of its Afghan refugee proposals. 5,000 before the end of the year and a further 15,000 over the longer term. We'll be discussing the adequacy of this with two MPs in a moment. But first, here's our policy editor, Lewis Goodall, with his assessment of Britain's responsibility.
Last night, the President said that Afghanistan was never about nation building.
Good afternoon.
Perhaps British Prime Ministers since the turn of the century didn't quite get the memo.
The only stable Afghanistan will be a democratic Afghanistan.
Women's rights must continue to be increased in Afghanistan, girls' rights and women's rights.
A secure and prosperous Afghanistan with safety at its heart is very important for the safety and security of British citizens on our streets.
Britain has been symbiotically connected to Afghanistan for 2 decades. Our men and women have fallen there. Thousands of their men and women have helped us in our endeavours. But as Parliament assembles tomorrow, beyond the military and strategic failures, the political heat will burn brightest on questions concerning what we owe to those people once in our employ and what we owe to those who weren't but who desperately need to leave or want to.
This will be a bloody civil war that will unfold in front of us. It's a very dark chapter that Afghanistan now enters, and many, many thousands will want to flee, particularly those who had a connection with the international coalition, and of course many women who chose to work or get educated.
Right now, there is one primary scheme in place for Afghans wanting to come to the UK, the Afghan Relocations and Assistance Policy, or ARAP. That replaced an older, less generous scheme. ARAP says that anyone, regardless of contract status, who faces intimidation or threat to life because of their present or past employment by the UK government can be relocated in the UK. It's estimated that as of the 12th of August, 3,100 have arrived in Britain under the old scheme or the new. But it's also estimated that there were 7,000 interpreters, translators and other locals in a variety of support roles during the 2003-14 period alone.
I'm sure that they will be aware that there is no military path. There is no military path to victory for the Taliban.
Clearly the UK believed it had more time to play with, more time to get these people out, and yet now they control nothing which happens in Afghanistan but the airport.
The Taliban at the moment holds all the cards. As you say, they hold the country, they hold Kabul, and there are a number of major logistical issues for the US and allied forces in trying to get people out.
The problem is now acute for even people who have a place on ARAP. We've spoken to an interpreter who assisted British forces in Helmand. Now, he had a place on the ARAP scheme. Indeed, he, his wife and 3 children were due to be leaving on a flight bound for the UK today. But of course, his flight has been cancelled. He has no idea when the next flight will come, if the next flight will come. He can't get through to anyone from the British government to discuss his case. He has no idea how he's going to be able to get from where he is to the airport safely if and when the time comes. For him, as you'll hear, the situation feels increasingly grave. And for reasons you'll understand, we haven't named him and we've revoiced his words.
While working with British forces, many terrorist Taliban saw my face. They threatened me and my family with death in Helmand. That's why I left the province for Kabul. My family and I feel in danger. We can hear their firing in the streets. And I'm watching television and can see how many of them are from Helmand. We need the British to get us out urgently, because it feels our situation is getting worse by the hour.
And ARAP only concerns people who have worked for the British government. There is a much bigger potential number of refugees overall. Tonight, the Home Office has announced the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme, or ACRS, to welcome up to 5,000 Afghans this year who have been forced to flee, with up to 20,000 in, quote, the long term, with priority given to women and girls and minorities. This is in addition to the numbers on ARAP. This would be the same figure as the government pledged for Syria several years ago, bearing in mind that 550,000 Afghans have been forced to abandon their homes this year alone. It is a number which is bound to be controversial in Parliament tomorrow.
I think there needs to be a realistic assessment of the need, and the numbers that we offer refuge to needs to match that need. And we do have obligations. It's not only about returning UK citizens who are trapped out in Kabul and in the rest of Afghanistan, who need to be helped to return, but also those to whom we have an obligation.
Afghanistan has been a permanent, if often distant, feature of British politics for 20 years. The irony, now our presence there is over, is that in years to come, it could loom yet larger. The potential for the biggest refugee crisis yet, one in one form or another of our own making.
Lewis Goodall. Well, joining me now is the Conservative MP and Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Tom Tugendhat, and Labour MP Stella Creasy. Good evening to you both. Before I talk about the numbers that are thinking are to come out according to Boris Johnson, tell me, Tom Tugendhat, you have got personal issues just now to resolve.
Well, I've been spending the last few days, few weeks, trying to get people out, trying to get people I know out, and I've been emailing and in touch with Number 10, with the MOD, and they've been working round the clock, but we've got people we've got to get out. And one of the interpreters I worked with in Helmand in 2006 is at the moment hiding in a home in Kabul with his wife and 5 children, and fearing a knock on the door, as he knows, everybody knows, Taliban death squads are going around the city looking for people like him.
Which would suggest to you that the face that the Taliban were putting out at the press conference isn't the reality on the ground.
Look at their words, look at their actions, and tell me, do they match? They don't match.
In that case, looking at the government's plan, is it good enough to say 5,000 before the end of the year and then 20,000 in the longer term?
The reality is, right now, I'm not that interested in those numbers. The reason I'm not that interested in those numbers is I want to get people out now. And the danger is, at the moment is not that we don't focus on that. It's that we focus on arbitrary numbers when the reality is the real focus today is to get people to the airport and out of the country.
But there's no way the British government seems to be able to get people from their homes to the airport. That's what we were hearing earlier.
There isn't any way of doing that. That's exactly right. That's why let's not worry about those absolute numbers right now. Let's get those who've got to the airport out, and let's get anybody who can get to the airport, who has a justified claim, onto an aeroplane. Let's not worry about the numbers.
But it's physically impossible to get to the airport. Unless you put commandos in, you're not going to get them out.
We can't get them out, but some Afghans are actually getting through, and some are managing to get in.
But Stella Creasy, if I just turn to you, although Tom Tugendhat doesn't want to talk about these numbers, what do these numbers that are announced tonight mean to you? 5,000 now and increasing to 20,000 over the longer term. Is that an admirable goal to set?
Well, like Tom, I'm currently working with families who are trying to get people, interpreters, people who've worked with the MOD, women who stepped up and took on the roles running schools in the communities that we asked them to do, to safety. And I think this question about extraction is a very serious one, because the Home Office and the Foreign Office are telling people at the moment to stay put until it's safe to get to the airport, but not offering people the idea of how to get there. Look, it's welcome that the government is thinking about resettlement, but I have a grave concern about this, is that we seem to be saying resettlement good, asylum bad. You know, as of last week, it was Home Office policy that if you were already here as an Afghan national, you could be sent back to Kabul. And as far as I'm aware, that is still policy. So I have both people who are terrified, who've claimed asylum here because they are interpreters, they've done the things that we've asked them to do, and also people who have family members stuck in Afghanistan outside of Kabul who need our help too. Yet we have no policy, no clarity on family reunification, for example, whether those people who stood up and helped our forces, whether their families should be made to suffer. And Tom is absolutely right. The stories that we are hearing are very clear that the Taliban may be going on social media, maybe trying to present themselves with spin, but at night they are going around with death squads, and they're looking for people who worked for the forces. They're saying that as long as you show remorse, there won't be retaliation. That's a very dangerous precedent to set. And they're also looking for women, in particular, who worked for international organisations. So like Tom, I don't believe a word they're saying right now.
So again, it comes back to governments have a responsibility to get people out. And we know that Canada said they'll take 50,000. And I know you say figures don't matter, but they do matter for various reasons, because it can be politically both advantageous and disadvantageous to say we're going to bring people here. Immigration as such is not a great vote winner. So I wonder how Boris Johnson needs to caveat that.
This is the challenge. The people who are in the boats, you know, last year there were 5,000 Afghan children who were already in Europe as unaccompanied minors. In those camps, the very same people that Nigel Farage maligns, they are from Afghanistan. They are these people. So are we going to be turning those people around and yet saying that somehow we want a resettlement scheme?
So what are we going to do, Tom Tugendhat?
Where they're going to come from. That's why the numbers are secondary to the need, to the persecution.
Yeah, but there has to be an ambition, doesn't there? And so numbers do matter. In politics, numbers do matter.
No.
There has to be a process.
Let Tom come in here. Thank you.
Sorry. Look, I mean, I certainly haven't heard anybody objecting to those people who stood by us coming here. I haven't heard anybody getting in touch with me saying that we shouldn't welcome those who stood up and worked with us at the toughest times in the hardest days of Afghanistan. I've had no objections to that. Now, I know you can get wrapped up into numbers, and I understand why you're doing it.
Well, because the government's announced it.
Well, and because you're trying to make it, you're trying to make it into an issue. The reality is the main issue today is to get people to the airport and out. We can't get them to the airport. What we can do is we can get them out when they're there. And so the focus that I'm absolutely pushing for is to make sure that we get everybody who's in that airport, everybody who gets in any side of that airport, because there's a military side and a civilian side, into the process and out.
But I'm going to come back to the figures.
Sure.
Do you believe that we have an obligation to get everyone that has helped Britain and America out if we can? Because there's also a secondary issue where Boris Johnson is saying tonight that women and children first. Now, these women and children may not be people that have helped the UK, but they're in danger. Now, are we going to say that we are a country that's going to accept people who are in danger?
I think that's exactly what the government's saying today. And in fact, I think in part of the statement that the government put out, they said they're also going to review the figures depending on what happens. At the moment, the key thing is just to get the process going. That's absolutely essential, and review it when we need to. But look, this isn't just about the United Kingdom. There are countries around Europe who also served with us. This was a NATO operation. We were all in it together. We all have a duty to this. This is absolutely essential. I was speaking to the Norwegian foreign minister only earlier today, and this is one of those issues where we've all got to stand together.
Let's go down the line a little bit now and say, at what point, if any, does the British government, along with the international community, make a decision, and on what basis will they make that decision to recognise a Taliban, I would say use the word government, but Taliban dominance in Afghanistan?
Well, that's not the way foreign affairs works, I'm afraid. We don't recognise governments, we recognise states. And the state of Afghanistan we've recognised for, what is it now,
but
102
well,
years.
I should be quite honest about that. I should be more clear. Be prepared to deal with a Taliban administration.
That's a different question.
That's the question.
I think that's a very difficult decision right now, because the reality is we're not dealing with a government in the way that most people would understand it. We're dealing with, frankly, an extremist ideology that its main expression is through murder. Now, that's really hard, because actually its principal allies are not even its regional partners, although it's getting a lot of support from them. It's actually the terrorist groups with whom it's still allied. Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the East Turkmenistan Islamic movement are just three of the many that are still there.
Thank you both very much indeed. Well, the world was shocked by the rapidity of the Taliban victory in Afghanistan. Fighters armed with little more than AK-47s rolled through the entire country in old cars and 4x4s, virtually unopposed. Given that President Biden has repeatedly said an Afghan army numbering 300,000 men received hundreds of millions of dollars for equipment and training, it was a stunning defeat. But was that number accurate? Newsnight has been told that the Afghan army was nothing like that number, which, if true, would partially explain the ease with which the Taliban won on the ground. Richard Watson has this exclusive story.
It was never meant to be like this. Taliban fighters, armed with little more than AK-47s, rolled through Afghanistan virtually unopposed.
The Taliban didn't actually fight any significant battles. It was more of a complete collapse in morale of the Afghan troops. That's why we saw this rapid collapse of the Afghan army and the advance of the Taliban.
The Afghan National Army was being grossly overestimated. There was also the problem that the Taliban were being underestimated.
So what lies behind the Afghan National Army's disastrous response? President Biden has been very clear that the billions of dollars pumped into the ANA over the last 20 years should have led to a very different response.
We spent over $1 trillion. We trained and equipped an Afghan military force with some 300,000 strong, incredibly well equipped, a force larger in size than the militaries of many of our NATO allies. We gave them every tool they could need. We could not provide them was the will to fight for that future.
But was the ANA really 300,000 men strong? We've spoken to two well-placed sources who say the true figure was far, far lower. If true, this would help explain how the Taliban rolled into regional capitals like Kandahar and on into Kabul virtually unopposed. Peter Juvenal spent most of his working life in Afghanistan. He lived in Kabul when the Taliban were in charge. As a war cameraman, he even sat with Osama bin Laden. 6 weeks ago, someone he knows very well, who we're choosing not to name, witnessed an extraordinary meeting.
It happened when Bismillah was appointed as the new defense minister. When he took over office, he was informed about the real strength of the Afghan military. These were senior political people, and they were very disturbed about this information.
This afternoon, I spoke to an Afghani source who knows what happened at that meeting. When that key fact emerged, former Foreign Minister Salahuddin Rabbani was there, and I'm told he said the Defence Minister had been horrified to discover that far from a well-trained force of 300,000, he had just 50,000 men. That 50,000 figure was supported by a terrorism analyst who's followed the Taliban for decades.
On paper, the Afghan National Army is supposed to comprise of some 300,000 troops. However, the actual number on the ground that was mobilized, that was in a position to fight the Taliban, is believed to be substantially less, somewhere around the figure of about 50,000. And despite the fact that there were inputs going to the Biden administration of this problem, it seems they were largely ignored.
So the big question is, this money that was paid for or provided by the West, where has it been going? And we know it's been going out in cash through the airport, usually to flights to Dubai. And there's many other ways that the money can disappear.
As in most investigations, following the money will be crucial. We asked the White House if intelligence showing the Afghan army was only 50,000 men strong was shown to the president. A spokesman declined to answer.
Richard Watson, well, a different story now. Appleby Horse Fair in Cumbria has been a magnet for thousands of Gypsy, Roma and travelling people in Europe for more than 2 centuries. But now their leaders believe that their way of life is under threat as the result of new planned legislation. If passed, it will put nomadic people at risk of criminal prosecution when there simply aren't enough legal sites where they can stay. Here's Emir Nader.
I'm John Dave, I'm a Romany Gypsy. My family's travelled these lands as far as I'm aware for 3, 4, maybe 500 years.
John has always lived on the road, a nomadic way of life, travelling across the country with his family.
That is my family tradition, and that is a culture that I am and my children are very, very proud of. And that's something that we are willing to stand up for and fight for.
Appleby Horse Fair is the largest gathering of Gypsy, Roma and traveller communities in Europe. It's a place to buy and sell horses, catch up with old friends, have fun and find love. Thousands come from across the UK and even abroad, travelling for weeks to arrive. In the UK, there's an estimated 300,000 to 500,000 Gypsy, Roma and traveller people. Around 60,000 live in caravans, a number that increases at this time of the year. These communities have often complained of being marginalised, but now a new conflict with the government is bringing travelling people like John out, wanting to raise awareness about their situation.
We stopped in 7 or 8 different stopping places. The council or the settled people say they're unauthorised. They're going to make us criminals for just simply living the way we want to live.
Stand by your man.
The government's Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Bill is a vast new piece of legislation that will reform criminal justice in England and Wales. It stands to enhance police powers in a number of contentious areas, and Part 4 of the bill will turn trespass from a civil offence to a criminal one. Crucially, it will criminalise unauthorised sites, so if travellers fail to leave and have caused or are perceived as likely to cause significant damage or distress, it could land them in prison for up to 3 months, even when they have nowhere else to go. Faced with such a stark threat to their way of life, many have begun organising against the bill.
We put out a call on social media, different community members got in touch, so founded a board, which is 6 ethnic members of Gypsies, Roma and Travellers, which is unique across the UK.
Some of, for most of these people, it's all they've ever known, travelling, and they're trying to stop that, and I think it's racist to do that. You can't stop someone's culture, what people have known their whole life.
We need to adopt negotiated stopping nationally across the country. What that basically means is an unauthorised encampment rolls into town, the local council go out, they set up bins, they set up waste disposal, there's a contract of behaviour entered into in a period of time and they're put into a piece of appropriate land. That's what we need. We need to be accommodated.
En route to the fair, it's not hard to find an example of an unauthorised encampment where relations between the travellers and settled community have turned sour. Unwanted visitors in Barnard Castle. Martin Clark found himself dealing with about 25 vehicles and 100 people pitched up at a local beauty spot in the run-up to the Appleby Fair.
From a town council point of view, as the tenant to this land, we were completely powerless. They intimidated people on here, people who walk through here with their dogs, skinning rabbits in front of them or abusing them.
For Martin and the local residents, the civil process to remove their unruly guests took too long. It took 4 days to serve an eviction notice. On the 5th day, the travellers upped and left for the fair. The waste left in their wake took the town council days to clear.
White goods, kennels, excrement, human and otherwise, intestines of animals, large and small, a goose, and just huge amounts of rubbish.
Would you support this new bill that's coming in?
Yes, I would support the bill. But you're asking at a time when we've just gone through 5 days of hell. Ask me perhaps in 2 weeks' time, and residents here perhaps would give us more considered opinion. Perhaps giving the police the power to remove them and move them on, but without taking their homes away. Yeah, maybe.
I'm not saying that some gypsies and travellers don't make a mess, because we have a tiny minority that do. Yeah. We have a tiny minority of idiots in the exact same way as the settled community have.
Billy Welsh is the UK's Shira Rom, or head gypsy. He's a spokesperson on the issues which impact the Roma, gypsy and traveller communities. So concerned is he by the threat of the bill and the fear it's causing in travelling communities, he's asked to sit down with the Home Secretary, Priti Patel.
Truthfully, I think it's a populist policy by a populist government who's looking at a very tiny minority who are basically defenceless against them because they've got such a majority in the Commons. It's a form of ethnic cleansing. It's just another nail in the coffin, eroding our way of life.
In the Conservative Party's last manifesto, they pledged to give the police more powers to tackle unauthorised traveller sites, including the ability to seize property and vehicles. But the police themselves have said that they don't want or need these powers. In fact, the National Police Chiefs Council have said that the issue is a planning one, and criminalising it is not the solution. And Parliament's Human Rights Committee that scrutinises bills agrees. It found that traveller communities often had little option than to set up unauthorised camps because local authorities are failing to build enough official sites. The Local Government Association told us councils were working hard to ensure the necessary provision.
So the bigger picture I see is then I will be locked up as a criminal for simply living my life. So the children then will be put into care homes. So what's going to happen then long term? The only people that are going to be paying for this is society, the taxpayer. So how's that solving the problem? It's not.
The government told Newsnight, if people do not commit significant harms and if they leave when asked to by the police or landowner, they will not risk having their vehicle seized. There are measures in place for local authorities to provide authorised sites for travellers to reside on. The bill is with the House of Lords and on track to become law. But those we met in Appleby are ready to ramp up the pressure to get the government to think again. They'll be hitting the road to Manchester in early October for the Conservative Party conference, horses, traps and all. With hundreds of years of tradition to defend, they are in this for the long haul.
Amy Nada. So let's take a look at some of the front pages, beginning with the Times. The story there announced at 10:30 tonight, the UK to admit 20,000 Afghans. And the picture there of the man that led the Taliban press conference. Taliban's PR man emerges from the shadows for a man who spent his life hiding from the public gaze. Zabihullah Mujahid was surprisingly calm. The Mirror has a picture there, escape from the Taliban, Afghan girl and her little brother as our country descends into hell. That 20,000 figure again, and the headline, Save Them. And the Express, big-hearted Britain to take in 20,000 refugees, and pictures there of an Afghan man and his family fleeing to the airport. And the Daily Telegraph, Priti Patel calls on Europe to help take in refugees. Fears grow on continent of new migrant crisis as UK offers 20,000 Afghans asylum. And story down the left there, the triple lock to be broken after a freak rise in average earnings. Well, that's all from us. I'll be here tomorrow. Until then, good night.